And this is the Dr. Chris Radio Horror Show on 91.3 FM, WCUW, as well as on vidme.com and youtube.com if you're checking this little discussion out there. And unfortunately, my co-host is not able to join us this evening, but we do have our special composer friend to the show, Lito Velasco, on the show with us to talk about the 30th anniversary of the Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3. The Dream Warriors!
Very nicely done. Thanks for having me.
I don't want to dream no more.
We're the Dream Warriors!
All right, let's get some tequila and our karaoke machines ready, because I think that's a great karaoke song.
Exactly. I've done it on karaoke a few times.
You know what? I swear to God, I've gone to a couple karaoke bars, and they never have that.
Really?
Yeah.
There's a place we go to in Burbank that has it, and we actually went and did karaoke. I think it was like a week or a week and a half after Wes Craven died, so I did Dream Warriors as a tribute to Wes.
Well, that's Burbank. Of course, all the Burbank karaoke's are going to have some of the best music programmed into it from Hollywood.
Yeah, well, true.
So, I mean,
you got me.
Goes without saying.
You got me there.
I'd also like to say that the day that we're recording this, on the 12th of March, happy birthday to Ken Sagos, one of the stars of Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, The Dream Warriors. It's his birthday today.
Roland Kincaid.
Yes, definitely. I don't know how old he is, but he's definitely older than me, as I was only 7 when that movie came out. 30 years ago, I was 7 years old. How old were you in 1987?
I was 13.
You were 13? You
Yes.
don't look much older than me, dude.
Well, thank you. It's the good living.
I did not see this movie when it came out in theaters. However, did you? Did you see theater?
I did not. I really wanted to see A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 in theaters. In fact, it's funny because I have a very vivid memory from my childhood or my adolescence of seeing the commercial for A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 when I was watching Friday night videos the week before the film was released. And they had this great little, 30 to 45 second spot that New Line had cut together. And I'll never forget one of the images in the advertisement, in the commercial, was that shot of Freddy Krueger when he's chasing what's her name? Patricia Arquette. I'm sorry, I blanked for a second. When he's chasing Kristen down the hallway.
Yes, the main character.
Yes, Kristen. When he's chasing Kristen Parker down the hallway, in the very beginning, she gets stuck in like the quicksandy kind of muddy floor.
Right. Yep.
There's this great shot where she turns around and Robert does this really cool thing where he kind of like comes into frame from around the corner at the end of the hallway, but he kind of slides on his feet, and it's this really smooth, awesome slow motion shot. And they featured that shot in the ad. When I saw that image and I saw that ad, that just stuck with me, and I was like, I have to see this movie. I have to see this movie, because I'd seen the first two on video. I was too young to go to the theater to see it. I was 13, and my parents wouldn't take me to see it. And I remember this was the first Nightmare on Elm Street film that actually had parents groups trying to boycott it at the theater.
Why did they wait till the third one after the first two? Also, did they forget that the second one had some slightly homoerotic undertones to it, or did nobody see it to start protesting?
It's funny because I almost wonder if a lot of that backlash was the result of how they marketed A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, because they really, really were keying into the fact that Freddy was, this sort of, charismatic villain centerpiece to the series. And I don't know if you remember at all, but when Nightmare 3 came out, if I'm not mistaken, they actually had a Day of Freddy on MTV where he like hosted videos and so I think they really marketed this film towards, teenagers and the youth. And I think that's why parents groups that, like to get up in arms about shit, I think that's why they got up in arms about it and started picketing the theater, because they felt like, hey, they're trying to target this for our children, and now we suddenly have to pay attention. Whereas before it was kind of like, it was just another horror film, so they didn't feel like they really had to throw any shade its way. And I think also, I would guess it's just because it had become so popular. They knew Nightmare on Elm Street is all of a sudden this brand name. It's something that we need to target because it's a known quantity.
I just found the Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 Dream Warriors TV spot commercial here. I don't know if to hear it through my computer into Skype, but I'll play it right now for this talk discussion.
It's 1987. Do you know where Freddy is? There's no waking up from this nightmare. No! A Nightmare on Elm Street, Part 3, Dream Warriors.
Starts Friday, February 27th at a theater near you. Consult local listing.
A Nightmare on Elm Street, Part 3, Freddy's back.
It was great. If you've seen 1 and 2, you have to see number 3. Totally bizarre. A total nightmare.
It was better than all of them combined. Freddy's a nut.
A Nightmare on Elm Street, Part 3, Dream Warriors, rated R.
Now playing at a theater near you.
Man, let me tell you something. You can find this Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors TV spot commercial. If you just go to YouTube and type in Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 commercial, you'll get at least 2 different commercials, and they don't make commercials like this anymore. I mean, they had I love it when they cut to the audience's reaction, like, Freddy is awesome, Freddy is badass, and they got such 80s looking hair. The girl's got the half faux hawk looking giant spike thing, and the guy has the huge mullet.
Yeah. 80s fashion.
Oh my god. The Nightmare on Elm Street movies couldn't be more products of the 80s if they tried, especially with the commercials. I want, after we're done, I'm going to go back and watch all the TV spots for all the Nightmare on Elm Street movies just to see what they look like.
Just to laugh your ass off at the stupidity of the decade.
It's one of those things that I don't think they could put on the Blu-ray because they'd have to find the people within the commercial probably to go out and pay them, or they'd have to spend the time to blur out their faces, kind of like they would do when they would repackage old toy commercials for the Transformers or G.I. Joe onto the DVDs for the releases of the episodes. They blurred the kids' faces out because they couldn't find those kid actors anywhere.
Right.
Or they're not kids anymore. They're full-grown adults like us. They're in their 30s and 40s.
Right. But I do remember in the commercial, I remember there were so many distinct things that really, I mean, not just that shot of Freddy, the slow motion thing, but also just, I remember they used the line where, Kristen says, "The man from my dreams, he's real, isn't me?" And then they were showing different images over that. They showed a glimpse of the Freddy snake. They showed a glimpse of Nancy, putting her hand over her forehead and falling backwards into the chair. And then they cut to a shot of Heather, laying in Camp Nancy saying, "He's real." I just remember so many things from that commercial kind of registering on that really subconscious level of, holy crap, everything you're seeing looks like it's straight out of a dream. And that's one of the things that I think that film really, really, really succeeded on was, Wes really knew how to capture the imagery and the visuals and the sensations of being in a dream. Chuck Russell and Frank and everyone involved in that film, they took that and they just elevated it to the next logical step in such a really brilliant way that those visuals really, really stand out. I mean, even when you watch the film now, it's dated in many ways, but a lot of those surreal kind of nightmarish images that they conjured up still work. They still register viscerally and subconsciously because it's stuff that we're all still afraid of.
That film in particular started the Freddy world, as it was called, the realm of Freddy Krueger, because at that point, Freddy would just, there would be a dream boiler room, Freddy would jump out, kill you, and that was the formula that was basically repeated in the first 2 movies. Or they would go to the abandoned factory, but it'd be a place that you could go to in the real world. In Freddy Part 3, 4, 5, and 6, there is the Freddy world that you can go to, especially 3, 4, and 5, which are kind of its own trilogy. It's very similar to what's referred to as the Tommy Jarvis trilogy in the Friday the 13th movies.
Yes, very much.
This is the Dream trilogy, as it's called. The Dream Warrior, the Dream Master, the Dream Child. And yes, the protagonist does, our heroine does change from Kristen to Alice, played by Lisa Wilcox in 4 and 5, who's been on Radio of Horror, by the way. But those 3 films are very heavily interconnected because of Kristen passing power over to Alice. The whole thing about the characters themselves having supernatural abilities, that was introduced into part 3, because the only supernatural individual was Freddy.
Exactly. I mean, a lot of the same concepts from part 3 were carried over into the next 2 films because, New Line, obviously they weren't stupid. They realized, holy crap, Nightmare 3, took the series to a level that was pretty much what they had always, no pun intended, it was always what they dreamed of. So, I think that's one of the reasons why when you look at the box office grosses for part 4, the box office grosses are through the roof. And, 4 is a really fun film. I really enjoy Nightmare 4, but I think a lot of the reason for the box office success it enjoyed is because part 3 was such a goddamn great movie and it was such a great sequel, and the audience really said, hey, if they're going to do more of that, I'm going to go back,
Yeah, and also part 4, the big difference between 3 and 4 is that 3, Freddy's makeup still looked like the way it did in part 1 and 2. By part 4, Freddy started looking really cartoony.
Yes.
His makeup was not as scary. Let's just face it.
Yeah, it was commercialized to a degree.
Exactly. Also, by part 4, MTV had exploded, so part 4 is always referred to as the music video of the Nightmare films.
Yep.
Even though they do, by the way, Dokken, who we were butchering their song of in the very beginning of this, they did a music video for part 3, but part 4 is considered to be like the big music video film, because that's when you had Robert on Good Morning America, for God's sakes, in part 4.
Yep.
And part 3, that's when they started commercializing Freddy Krueger.
Yeah, he became the household name that he really enjoyed a status of for many years in the 80s, I think in large part because of part 3, because it was such a huge mainstream success. We talk a lot about it in the documentary. It's just Nightmare 3 really was the one that turned the franchise, I think, into a true franchise. And that's not to disrespect parts 1 or part 2, but there's something about part 3 that while it's still scary and while it still retains some of that surreal kind of Wes imagery, and it definitely has Wes's touch. There's a lot of things in that film that feel very much like Wes Craven's touch. Chuck Russell and Frank Darabont were really, really smart in introducing the mythology of Freddy Krueger, the nun, his mother, Amanda Krueger, and the Christian kind of mythology. I was just talking to someone about that on Facebook the other day, because they were saying, well, if you look at it, Nightmare on Elm Street 3 is really a Christian film. And I'm like, I don't know if I'd go so far as to say it's a Christian film, but it definitely taps into that sort of old school Christian horror mythology that a lot of our classic, archetypal villains in horror films, such as vampires, have intertwined into their mythology and into their legend. And that's part of why they're so successful, because let's face it, a lot of people respond to that on a subconscious level. And when you mix that with all the nightmarish sort of imagery and the nightmarish sort of ideas that you're also registering on a subconscious level too, I think you have such a great formula for success. And, that's one of the reasons why Nightmare 3 is such a classic, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, all of the trappings to kill a vampire in any of the films they do in the Nightmare Part 3 with the crucifix and nursery rhyme and how they kill again.
Yeah, they definitely dipped their toe in that water, but in a very smart way. They didn't make it quite the same thing, because it wasn't like, a cross will ward him off. It was more the whole, well, you need to put his soul to rest, which I thought was very clever as well.
Yeah, and then that becomes so much more prevalent with his mother being a nun.
Yes, of course. But I think they even used it, because let's face it, Nightmare 5 kind of went back to that well a little bit when they brought back Amanda Krueger, but they recast her with Beatrice Beeple instead of the female who played her in part 3, which her name's escaping me at the moment. But they went back to that well to a degree, but I just don't think it worked quite as well as it did in part 3, because part 3 there's something about the way that it's introduced, it's that sort of old school horror where it's like, is it real? Is it not real? I'm not quite sure. You know, you see when the doctor, you know, Neil Gordon sees the nun for the first time in the hallway, and then, you know, he looks again and she's disappeared. It's that great kind of old school horror where you're like, okay, did that happen? Did that not happen? I'm not quite sure. I can't put my finger on it. You don't find out till the very end. Holy crap, you know, that was actually, you know, a ghost. But there's something about the way that they used it that really, like I said, it registers very effectively, and it doesn't feel cliched, even though it is a cliched horror trope. They use it in a way that it feels fresh and interesting and new.
The one thing I didn't understand about Part 5, when they reintroduced Amanda, they made it seem like she was trapped somewhere, but in Part 3, she's walking around as a normal ghost.
When you say the one thing you didn't understand about Part 5, I'm like, the one thing you didn't understand about Part 5? Like, not to be mean, I love all the Nightmare films and they're in their own special way, but there's a lot of things in Part 5 that, you know, I kind of go, okay, I guess, sure.
Did you ever read the Nightmare on Elm Street's Part 1, 2, and 3 continuing story novel?
I did years ago. I read them, and I used to own them all. Of course, I have no idea what happened to them, like many things that I used to own, like comic books and toys and all that. But I read them. Yeah, definitely. I read them. And I remember the original novelization for Part 3 was extremely different from the finished film, because the original novelization was actually based on Wes and Bruce Wagner's original screenplay. So there's a lot of stuff in the book that's crazy different from the finished film.
Yeah, like for instance, they the deaths in the script in the novels are a lot more grotesque, and Freddy is extremely vulgar by saying the words cunt and fuck and stuff like that. He usually will just say bitch a lot, but he never says cunt, and he never usually says fuck.
Right. Yeah. No. There was that, and then there was also, I think, Kincaid dies in the book, and he dies in a really kind of horrific way, which is actually, it's perverse. If I remember his death correctly, it's like borderline perverse. I remember Philip's name in the book, I think, is Laredo instead of Philip, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, yeah, they don't make a mention that Freddy's mother is a nun, or he was the bastard son of 100 maniacs.
Right, and also Freddy dies completely differently in the book.
Yeah, he dies by his glove.
Yeah, the whole third act is completely different. If I'm not mistaken, the third act takes place in the basement of the original house.
Yeah, and Nancy kills him, not by holy water.
Yeah, no holy water in the book.
So they did a huge bunch of rewrites with Wes's script, which weren't changed. Now, a lot of times with movie and novelization adaptations, they're always going to be based on the first script, because they got to get that book out on time for when the movie comes out.
Exactly.
And they do not have time to sit there and rewrite stuff based on changes in script. They start writing that book based on the original script immediately. That actually has worked out a lot of ways. It's not like studios are scrambling to put a kibosh on these books coming out. Because they're getting their original script out there, so fans will get a kind of a different perspective of what's happening. In Rob Zombie's Lords of Salem novelization of his own movie, which he co-wrote with another author, the opening sequence is really different. In fact, I think they had to change it just because of how grotesque it was. It was something that was so unfilmable, even with an animatronic baby. The witches of Salem actually kill, murder, strip the flesh off a baby. Whereas in the movie Lords of Salem, they're seen just spitting on a baby, and that's it. I mean, they don't really show much. They show them lifting the baby up over their heads. And I guess it's implied that the baby sacrificed to Satan, but that's really it. And it's an animatronic baby. Anyway.
I know a lot of fans have said over the years they really want to read Wes's original script. Well, I should say Wes and Bruce's original script. But I always tell people, it's out there. You just have to do a little digging. But I always tell people who are fans of the series, I encourage them, you should check it out, because the original script is so off the wall in so many ways. It is so zany and ludicrous in many ways that I can see why New Line said, we like a lot of what Wes brought to the table, but we're really going to go, in a somewhat different direction. Because there is a lot of stuff in the finished film that obviously came from Wes's original script. It's just, I think in many ways, what Wes wrote for the first draft was, I don't want to say it was unfilmable, but it was unfilmable at the time. You know, it would have been really difficult for New Line to film that script financially, and also it would have been difficult for them, I think, to film the script and release it and not get a shit ton of backlash because of the things that happened, because of the things that are said.
What's funny is I found on YouTube, if you, again, type in Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 commercial, you can find a 1988 Media Home Entertainment VHS spot for the Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3. I guess this was a promotional video sent out to retail stores to order copies of Nightmare Part 3.
Oh, that's Freddy, you mean?
Yeah, the one hosted by Freddy, where they cut into stuff from like Good Morning America and the Joan Rivers show.
Yes.
I love finding stuff like this, just old commercials from like way back in the day, which a lot of people might not have seen because, let's face it, I mean, there were a lot of video store owners, but there weren't a lot of video store owners that, you know, that were just showing this on like a TV for everyone to see. So, you know, this is kind of a rare thing that only video store owners saw, on which there were thousands of them all over the country. Majority of people I have talked to, I only know a handful that were ever video store owners that could tell me some of the cool promo freebie stuff that they would get from studios to order copies of a VHS tape that they would rent out multiple times.
Yep, I was going to say, the way they used to do business, they had to convince people to order their product. You know, I swear it's going to make you tons of money. So when you watch that little video that you're talking about with Robert, and as Freddy, it's kind of funny because he spends so much time like pointing at a chart and talking about the proven financial success and the numbers that Nightmare on Elm Street as a series can bring in. And I'm just like, man, they had to actually spend money and time to produce these things back in the day. And it's kind of just ironic watching Freddy Krueger give this like financial lesson to independent video store owners, like, trust me, you're going to get your money back on this return. It's a no can lose deal. It's like, what's going on here? Like,
how much money were you paid to do this, Robert? I mean,
I know.
How much did you sell out for?
Well, God, I'm sure it was in his contract at the time. You know, he had to do whatever publicity they asked him to do. So.
Oh my God, maybe it was like one of those things where he's like, okay, I'll do it, but it's gonna be the last day we film, and I'm still in makeup, and we just go right to these stupid little commercial spots, so I don't have to get makeup again. You know what I mean?
Get this shit done so I can get the hell out of here.
Yeah, like you know, because let's face it, Freddy Krueger, you look at the amount of screen time that Freddy Krueger's on screen for in any of the Nightmare movies, it's not much. Like, it is, people complain, and I mean complain, about the main character not being on screen that often sometimes. I'd cite 2014 Screen Gems Godzilla movie, for instance, which is granted because Godzilla is only on screen for 11 minutes, and that movie is 2.5 hours long. I just saw the new King Kong movie, Kong Skull Island. King Kong is in that movie a lot. I mean, a ton of time is with King Kong to really give us like a hero to root for in that film. And with Freddy Krueger, I went back and started thinking about all the times he's on screen. Honestly, it's not that much.
It's not a lot, no. I mean, it's not a lot at all. I mean, and I think it expands as the series goes on, obviously. Once he became the centerpiece of, you know, the franchise, obviously his screen time increased. But, yeah, even in 3, it's definitely more about the kids, you know, than it was...
The last of the Elm Street children.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly. See? So, yeah, I mean... He's only in the first film, I think Robert is only, or I keep saying Robert, Freddy is only in the film for a total of something close to 7 minutes, which is just, it's insane when you think about it. But I mean, it makes sense because the film was more centered on Nancy. By the time you get to part 4, I mean, if you remember correctly in the opening titles, before the film even starts, it says Robert Englund in A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master. That was the first film that actually had his name, you know, on the title cards before the actual title of the film.
Yeah,
so
I'm looking at the poster right now, and it says a Rennie Harlan film, Robert Englund in, you know, after Robert Shea and Smart Eggs.
And I think before that, in the first 3 Nightmare films, his name was always in a box on the poster in the credits, and it was always last. It always said and Robert Englund as Fred Krueger, and Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger.
Yeah.
And it was always after special appearances by Hope Lang and Clu Gulager,
Yeah, and the Nightmare Part 3 poster does have that. Now, by the way, speaking of the Nightmare Part 3 poster, so that's obviously Robert on the poster as Freddy Krueger. But who are the other people in this poster, other than Ken Sagos, could possibly be the black guy on one of Freddy's knives?
It's weird because when you look at the poster, I mean, again, when Matthew Peak did these posters, I mean, I know on the first film he didn't have any footage and he didn't have really reference. He was just sort of told what it was about, and he had to kind of go from there. When you look at the Nightmare on Elm Street 3 poster, it's like, okay, Nancy's on the center blade. I guess that's Kincaid on the left. Is that Joey to the right of Nancy? And then that's supposed to be Taryn to the very right, except she has, white hair instead of black hair or dark brown hair.
And she's completely dressed different, like that. The outfit she's wearing in the poster looks completely different.
Yeah, it's clearly just one of those concepts, like, okay, here's kind of what it's about. Nancy's back. We've got this character that's named this and looks like this and blah, blah, blah. I just feel like, and again, I love the poster, so I'm not at all trying to say anything negative about what we're talking about here with this poster, because I actually have a signed copy of the poster in my apartment, but it's clearly like they're just like, here's the concept, get us a painting. I mean, that's my guess. I can't say that as with any level of expertise because I've never asked Matthew Peak if that's the case, but if I had to guess, I would say that's totally the case. And another interesting thing about the poster, actually, this is total like nerd stupid geek, doesn't really matter, I'm a total horror dork, but if you look at the video poster, the video poster had a different tagline than the theatrical poster, and that's how you can always tell if you have an original or if you have a reprint aside from the poster being folded, because the video poster actually said, if you think you'll get out alive, you must be dreaming. And the theatrical poster actually said, if you think you're ready for Freddy, you must be dreaming.
Yeah, the book that I have in my hand for the soundtrack again, yes.
So, I mean, they obviously had a lot of different marketing products and different versions of the posters and taglines and stuff in place. But again, it's, not, I don't want to say corporate movie making, but it shows you how they distribute and market films in different ways. But by that time, like we said, Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, Freddy had become, by the time the film comes out on video, they're responding to what a huge success it was in the theater. And obviously the third film was a huge success in theaters. $45 million when it came out. I'm sure they had no idea it was going to do that kind of money.
The Nightmare on Elm Street music box set came out about over a year ago. It came out actually at the end of 2015, late 2015, I believe.
Right.
And I got it last year, and it was like the best $100 I ever spent because you get all of the soundtracks in there. When I posted my review about it, people had asked me, "Is the Dokken song on there?" And I was like, "No."
Sorry to disappoint everyone.
This is just the orchestral soundtrack, which is a lot cheaper to mass produce and re-release than a soundtrack with multiple bands on that you have to track down all the bands and pay millions of dollars in royalty fees.
Yeah, very true. I love that box set, although me being the completist that I am, there are still a few tracks that aren't on the box set that I would absolutely love to get my hands on, but I don't know if it's ever going to happen because that was a really thorough release. Really? And I pretty much doubt Perez is going to go back to the well again to do another one.
Are you serious? There's stuff missing? Because each one of this has a section that says bonus unreleased.
Yes, but if you, like, for instance, in the first Nightmare on Elm Street, there's the track that you hear when Tina goes out into the alley and she first sees Freddy, and he's got the extended arms. Yeah. That entire track is missing from the box set, unfortunately.
No. Is that on the original CD release?
It is not. It's never been released. The only way that I actually have a copy of it is I knew this guy that took his Blu-ray player and he had this audio system where he could actually do all the 9.1 different channels of audio, and somehow he isolated just the music onto one channel, and he ripped the music from the Blu-ray. But even then, you can hear the faintest bit of echo in certain spots on the track. You know, he ripped it, and then we went ahead and sent it through a processor and upgraded the sound and everything, because we were both like, well, I want every note of music that Charles composed for that film. And it's the same thing with Nightmare 3. There's a few tracks, like one that really sticks out in my mind that I absolutely love that is not on that box set, is when Dr. Gordon goes to the church to get the crucifix and the holy water. There's this really cool synth track playing in the background that's not on the box set, which is kind of like, I mean, I get it. It's hard to track down every, note of music and to get super pristine, copies or even good sounding copies, because a lot of the stuff is so old. But for people like me that are huge fans and completists, when stuff is missing, you're kind of like, oh man, come on. That's like, I want that track,
Name the other two movies that the hospital in Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 is mentioned in. Or in, actually. It's either mentioned in or the actual hospital is in it.
Well, I mean, we see it in Freddy vs. Jason.
Correct.
We see it there, of course. I don't remember it being mentioned in another film.
Part 5.
Part 5? They actually mention Weston Hills?
Yep.
Well, there you go. You stumped me.
And did you ever play the Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 video game, which, by the way, was not called the Part 3 video game, but it was a PC game that was based on Part 3?
I never actually did, no.
Yeah, it came out for the PC and the Commodore 64. This is not the Nightmare on Elm Street game that came out for the Nintendo Entertainment System. It was just called The Nightmare on Elm Street, and it was specifically based on the third one, as all the characters in the game are from the third film.
I wonder if I could get an emulator of it.
If you do, please let me know, because the emulator I found, I had to scrub out of my computer. It wasn't bad. I just didn't know how to upload it to my computer properly in order to play, and I end up keeping it on there too long. The files eventually kind of got old and damaged. I think the website I went to, it was a perfectly fine website. The guy had basically copied it and just stuck it up on a website. Because, as much as I don't believe in piracy, and obviously being a musician, you don't believe in piracy either, when things like this are unavailable, you're kind of like, well, how else am I supposed to get it when they're never going to release this Nightmare on Elm Street PC game ever?
If you go to YouTube and just type in Commodore 64 Nightmare on Elm Street, you can watch a video of a guy playing it.
Oh, okay.
So it's totally, I mean, you can at least see it, but I'm betting there's got to be an emulator out there somewhere. And going back to your other question, I feel like an idiot now. Of course, Weston Hills is mentioned in Part 5 because that's where Amanda's body is locked up.
Right.
It's hidden in the tower of the hospital. You'll have to excuse me. I spent the last 3 days moving to a new apartment, so my brain is totally fried.
Now, is this... So I haven't watched Part 5 in a while just because, well, let's face it, it's Part 5. As much as I love Lisa Wilcox, Part 5 is not great. I don't remember is Weston Hills run down and abandoned in Part 5?
It looks like it totally is. Like when you watch that film, it looks like it's a completely abandoned hospital by that point in time, which, if you think about it, it's kind of like, okay, well, they must have really, after the disaster of Dream Warriors, that whole place must have said, let's just fold up shop and move to a new place. Because, I mean, it's like, it can't be more than a couple years later. So it's like you're sitting there thinking, wow, they really moved fast to avoid any kind of, or maybe they just got the hell out of Dodge because they were trying to avoid lawsuits.
And then they reopen it for Freddy vs. Jason in 2002.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Which is like, wait a second, whose idea was this?
Never mind the fact that the continuity of Part 6 doesn't even make any sense, considering that all the children of Elm Street are wiped out. People just don't have babies anymore. Wait, what? I don't get. Other discussion. That is a whole other tangent about the continuity errors of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, which nobody was paying attention to when they were making them.
Exactly. There are a lot of diatribes we can go off in that, and also a lot of diatribes you can go off on when it's like, all right, it's time to just reverse course and change direction with the franchise. So let's just totally rewrite the history, as you're saying. But that happens in so many franchises anyway that it's like, I don't want to say it's excusable, but fans are obviously very forgiving in many ways.
Yeah, and then let's not forget that Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 also gave us the first appearances of Patricia Arquette and Lawrence Fishburne.
Yes, Patricia Arquette. Wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember being very in love with Patricia back in the day, and apparently the entire cast pretty much was.
And she was a horrible actress too at the time.
It's funny. I mean, I don't know if I'd say she was horrible, but definitely she improved with age. But there's a lot of stories. I mean, if you again go and watch the documentary and do additional research, there's a lot of stories about theories as to why Patricia's performance is the way it is, and you know, there's a lot of quote unquote blame to go around, if you will. I'm not pointing any fingers and I don't want to name any names, but like I said, if you go back and watch Never Sleep Again, there are plenty of people that talk about certain people treating Patricia in certain ways, which might account for the way she was performing. So
I see. Very interesting.
yeah, I'm not gonna, like I said, I'm not gonna name any names. It's pretty obvious. I'll just say that. But
And it's too bad Lawrence Fishburne didn't have more to do in his first outing.
yeah, and it's too bad. From what I've heard, Lawrence is not a big fan of talking about the film. I don't know if that's true or not, but
I wonder why that is.
yeah, well, I mean, I don't know. Let's face it, in Hollywood, sometimes horror is often viewed as the redheaded stepchild of the studios, which I always find to be kind of ironic and unfair, because it's like whenever a studio needs a quick buck, they always churn out a low budget horror movie. And it's like, okay, you're relying on it in a way to be one of the like financial tent poles of your industry. But at the same time, everyone seems to be ashamed of being involved in horror. Well, not everyone. I shouldn't say everyone, but a majority of the industry seems to be ashamed of being involved in horror, you know, and it's just kind of like, that's really unfair. Like, there's a lot of amazing things in horror, and there's a lot of amazing people in horror, and there's a lot of amazing ideas, and it's obviously churning you a good dollar. So don't treat it like it's inferior to, you know, Oscar picks, because it's not. At least in my opinion, it's not.
Well, yeah, I mean, there have been horror movies nominated for Academy Awards, so get over your prejudice of like whatever it is that you made, and just, you know, no one forced you to take that paycheck. So.
Exactly. But I think a lot of people. This is just pure speculation. I can't speak for Lawrence Fishburne because I don't know him and I've never met him in person. But I mean, I don't know. I think a lot of people just feel like it's a part of their past that they did as a stepping stone, but it's not something that they're super, you know, psyched about having on their resume or whatever. I don't know. I mean, it's weird. You look at some of the stars today. Well, not stars today, but if you look at some of the stars from the 90s that are now doing conventions,
yeah,
and they're doing convention appearances, like, it's like they'll do the shows, but they almost feel ashamed of doing the shows. And it's like, there should be no shame attached to doing a horror convention. Like, in my opinion, of course, I'm a horror buff, so I'm going to say this, you know, fully and proudly, especially because I'm starring in a horror film that's currently on home video. It's like, I don't see any shame in it whatsoever. But I just feel like I said, it's almost like a dirty little secret to a lot of people. And I just think it's a tragedy in many ways.
Out of all the films, would you have them watch the other trilogy, by the way? There's the Wes Craven trilogy, which there's the 1, 3, and 7.
I think I would do that because I have a fond appreciation for what Wes said when he talks about how he became involved with Nightmare on Elm Street again, with, you know, Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3. He talked about how, you know, after seeing Part 2 and having done the first film, he said, I didn't see where else you could go except the logical extension of someone fighting Freddy on their own was the concept of people fighting Freddy as a group, finding strength in numbers, finding strength as, you know, a sum that is, you know, that is great because of its parts, you know, because the number of parts involved. I think that's the logical evolution. So I would definitely go 1, 3, 7. And of course, because Wes is involved, I feel like so much of the machinations, I will say, I guess, of the story, I think the machinations are really, really smart because so much of it came from the mind of Wes. And like I said, I have a great, great respect for Wes, and I think he was extremely inventive and a total creative genius in many ways. So that's definitely the trilogy that I would go with.
And what could you say, just before we let you go, about the music from the Nightmare on Elm Street movie? Being a composer, of course. Obviously, you worked on a film that was connected to Part 3, Don't Fall Asleep, but what else can you say? Doken's song aside, we all love the Dream Warriors song. About the composer of Nightmare Part 3, because you obviously wrote music for other fan films and, a film that was connected to Part 3, Don't Fall Asleep.
I guess what I would say is the soundtrack to Nightmare 3 is super interesting in many ways. And I think, again, if you go back and watch Never Sleep Again, they talk about this a little bit. They talk about how they brought in Angelo Badalamenti to score the film. And Rachel Talalay talks about how what he delivered was really interesting and it was very much in the typical Angelo style, but it wasn't quite what they were looking for a score for a Nightmare on Elm Street film. And indeed, if you go back and listen to this, the original CD release has a lot of tracks that aren't in the finished film, and those same tracks appear on the box set that we were referring to earlier. There's a lot of tracks that weren't used. There's a lot of versions that got scrapped. There's certain tracks that are meshed together. Like, for instance, in the scene in the boiler room where, Freddy says, "Look, Joey, all the piggies come home." That track is actually, it's a combination. There's a point where two tracks are seen together and they're overlapping and playing on top of each other, which is kind of weird. But it's like, I think they just got a score from Angelo that they figured, well, we have to, use this as best as we can. And they brought in another composer. Ken Harrison came in and did some additional scoring. Like, for instance, the chase I was talking about earlier where Freddy is chasing Kristen through the basement of the house. Ken Harrison composed most of the music in that entire scene. It's an interesting score. It definitely feels like an amalgam of different, sources. In fact, there's scenes in the film that are straight up tracked with music from Charles Bernstein's original score. Like when Dr. Gordon first sees the nun, that's a track that's lifted straight out of the original film. When Nancy is, talking to the kids and telling him his name is Freddy Krueger, and she's telling him, the legend of Freddy, you're the last of the Elm Street children. That's straight out of the first film. When she's with Joey in the hospital and she says, "Let him go, you bastard," and Freddy cuts into his chest and says, "Come and get him, bitch." That's from Charles Bernstein's score. So you can tell that they definitely had to figure out how to make the best of a situation that wasn't ideal. But what I would say about Angelo's score that I have great respect for is that he definitely goes back to that original theme that Charles Bernstein composed, and he uses it in tracks, sometimes where it's very obvious and sometimes in not so obvious ways. And I have a great regard for that because, to me, Charles Bernstein's Nightmare on Elm Street theme is one of the greatest and most underappreciated themes in not just horror movie history, but in movie history. I think it's one of the most effective and evocative themes that's ever been written for a film.
Well, if anyone's interested in the music from the Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, you can pick up the entire box set, which is still available, which is by Varis Sabadand. You can just type in Nightmare on Elm Street Nightmare on Elm Street Music Collection, and you'll be taken to the website because I'm going to butcher the name of the company that releases it. The Dokken song was put out on a yellow vinyl, little round vinyl 33 a couple of years ago. I don't know if that's still available, but you can always find the Dokken song itself on iTunes and download it. And we'd like to thank Lito for coming on the show with us once again to talk about the 30th anniversary of the Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, The Dream Warriors.
And check it out. The film aged very well, in my opinion. And thank you very much for having me on once again.
Absolutely, man. No problem. It was a lot of fun talking about this amazing film. And admittedly, it's not the first Nightmare movie I ever watched. The first Nightmare movie I ever watched was Part 4. But I do remember there being a giant cardboard cutout in my local video store of Part 3's poster.
It's a great image. It sticks with you. That poster, like I said, it might not be the most accurate rendition, but it's greatly evocative. And it's a beautiful image.
Yeah, that poster always, especially the cardboard cutout, the 3D standee that was in video stores, that was the first thing I ever saw when it came to Freddy Krueger. And I think the one thing that really stuck in my mind at the time was like that.
And if you,
what is this? Does this army fight Freddy? Do these cool looking kids? And yeah, in a way, that's all.